Rachel and Tom had always dreamed of a fresh start. After the chaos of their last few years, a new house in the country seemed like the perfect solution. They found an old, charming Victorian house on the outskirts of town, nestled in a quiet, almost forgotten part of the countryside. It was a little run-down, sure, but it had character. The price was right, and the possibilities felt endless. It was time to leave their troubled past behind them. The house creaked and groaned as they unpacked, and at first, everything seemed perfectly fine. It was cold and a bit dark, but Rachel liked the charm. The walls were thick and old, the wooden floors gave off that comforting scent of aged wood, and the big windows let in just enough light. They started to make it their own, unpacking their furniture and hanging up pictures. Everything felt normal. But that night, Rachel heard something. A faint scraping sound from somewhere behind the walls. It wasn't loud, but enough to catch her attention. She tried to ignore it. It was an old house, after all. Houses creaked and groaned. "Did you hear that?" Rachel asked Tom as they lay in bed that night, the wind howling outside. Tom didn't answer immediately. He was still staring at the ceiling. "It's probably just the pipes," he mumbled. "Old houses make noises." Rachel wasn't so sure. The sound had a certain rhythm to it, like someone was trying to get through the walls. She felt a shiver run down her spine. But she forced herself to sleep, convincing herself that it was nothing. The next night, the sound returned. Louder. Closer. Rachel woke up in the dark, her eyes darting to the walls. The scratching was unmistakable. It was there again, persistent and almost frantic. She held her breath, trying to convince herself it was just a mouse or some other animal trapped behind the walls. But the sounds grew louder, and there was something else in the mix now. A faint whisper, too soft for her to understand, but it made her stomach twist. Tom woke up at the sound, sitting up in bed with a groggy frown. "What is that?" "I don't know. I keep hearing scratching," Rachel replied, her voice shaking. "It's like something is in the walls." Tom stood up, rubbing his eyes. "Maybe it's rats or something. I'll check it out tomorrow." But the next day, there was no sign of any rats or any damage. They inspected every inch of the house, every corner, every crack in the wall, every piece of furniture, but found nothing that could explain the strange noises. That night, the whispers grew louder, almost as if they were calling to her. "Come closer." It was a voice that didn't sound human, almost like a rasp, like something trapped. Rachel couldn't sleep. She sat up in bed, wide awake, listening intently. The air in the room felt thick, almost suffocating. The walls seemed to close in around her. She tried to ignore it, but the whispering was too clear, too close. And then she noticed something that made her blood run cold. There was a door that hadn't been there before. She wasn't sure if it was her mind playing tricks, but she was sure it wasn't there the day before. The door was small, hidden behind a tall bookshelf in the corner of the room. Rachel's heart began to race. She told herself it was just a storage closet or something, but the feeling in her chest told her otherwise. The whispers grew louder. "Help us, Tom," Rachel whispered urgently. "Tom, wake up." Tom groggily opened his eyes, blinking in confusion. "What's wrong?" "There's a door behind the bookshelf." "I didn't notice it before." Tom sat up, rubbing his eyes. "Are you sure? We've checked the whole house. I'm telling you, it wasn't there." Tom didn't seem convinced, but after a long pause, he finally got out of bed and moved the bookshelf. Behind it was a wooden door, old and dusty, with strange marks carved into the wood. It didn't look like any kind of door they'd seen in the house before. "Should we open it?" Rachel's voice trembled as she asked the question. "I don't know," Tom said, his voice cautious. "But we should at least look." They opened the door. The air that rushed out was stale, thick with dust and rot. Beyond the door was a narrow, dimly lit hallway that stretched far longer than they expected, vanishing into darkness. "This is weird," Tom whispered, looking down the hall. "We didn't know this was here." Rachel's heart was hammering in her chest. She knew they shouldn't go in, but something urged her forward. She had to know what was causing the whispers. The further they ventured down the hallway, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The air was heavier, colder, and the whispers were growing louder still. The walls of the narrow hallway seemed to press in on them, making it harder to breathe. Finally, they reached the end of the hallway, and Tom reached for the door there. It creaked open, revealing a small, stone chamber. The room was damp and cold, with stone walls that were covered in scratches, deep gouges that looked as though they had been made with nails. In the center of the room was a wooden chest, old and decrepit. Rachel couldn't breathe. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and decay. Who would do this?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Let's get out of here," Tom said urgently, grabbing her arm. But before they could turn to leave, they heard something else, a faint, high-pitched laugh that made their blood run cold. It came from the shadows. Out of the corner of her eye, Rachel saw movement. She whipped her head around, but there was nothing there. But then, the chest creaked open. The dark, suffocating air around them thickened, and the scratching noise started again, this time from within the chest. The lid of the chest slammed open with a deafening crash. A figure emerged, hunched and grotesque, covered in the same scratches Rachel had seen on the walls. It was not a person, not anymore. The thing before them was monstrous, with hollow eyes and a gaping mouth that let out a terrifying scream. Its skin was stretched tight, like it had been trapped in this room for years. Before they could scream, the figure lunged at them, its gnarled hands reaching for their throats. Rachel and Tom bolted, running down the hallway and back into the house, but the whispers were everywhere now, in the walls, in their ears, as though the house itself was alive, closing in on them. They rushed to the front door, but it wouldn't open. The house had sealed them in. The walls started to close in, the ceiling pressing down, and Rachel and Tom realized, with sickening clarity, that the house was not just a house, it was a prison. And they were trapped. The scratching started again, louder than ever. And the whispers, they were no longer whispers, they were screaming.